right. Thank you so much for everyone who's tuning in. My name is Dom Jones. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Lead with Talent. Lead with Talent is all about empowering leaders and organizations to achieve purposeful impact. We do that through training, through consulting, and leadership development. That said, I have been excited for this conversation probably for the last few weeks. We're going to be talking with none other than Jen Fitzmaurice, who is amazing in her own right. You're going to hear all about that in a second. She also happens to be my former boss eons ago in our career back at AT&T. We'll talk about that. But more importantly, she is an amazing leader, an amazing individual. And there are only a handful of leaders that I've worked for where over time I can say that they've become friends. And Jen, you are certainly one of them. So I'm excited to talk with you today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here because you are right. This has been an amazing journey for you and I that we've went on from working together, from you being an integral part of my team and really helping me on my journey to me chasing you at a new company. Um, and then you leaving me, and then here we are again having a conversation. So this journey just continues for us, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. So it sounds like this is a little bit of therapy too. All right. So obviously, we're going to talk about leadership, and a lot of the theme of what we'll discuss is in the area of effective influence. So we'll get into that in a second. But I'd love for you to share a little bit about your background and your career journey.
Absolutely. My career journey, first of all, I would say has been one that's been unexpected. I pursued a degree in mathematics a long time ago, and I didn't really know where that was going to take me. And I was lucky enough to land a kind of an entry level job at what was at the time uh, Southwestern Bell Mobile Systems. So I
Mm,
was in Missouri in the Midwest, and this is kind of as wireless was really just starting to take off, and I started this career at what we now know as AT&T, and 23 years with AT&T took me on an amazing journey. I had, I think, about 22 different leaders during that journey of my time at AT&T, and I was able to navigate through, I think, 18 different roles in the company. Some of those were individual contributor roles. Some of those were roles where I led small teams. Some of those were roles where I led really large, massive, call center teams. It took me through technology changes. It took me through different business units. It during that role at AT&T, I moved cities. I moved from St. Louis to Dallas,
mhm.
and I went on that journey of always continuously learning. And I would take something that I was doing in one role and I would figure out how I could translate that to something new. I really enjoyed having a fresh set of eyes and going into something that I frankly knew not much about. But I could take transferable leadership skills, and I could take, that curiosity. I could take positive communication and leadership and team building and engagement and all of those things, and go on that journey. So about 23 years into my time with AT&T, I'd started getting a little itchy, and I put down on paper some things that were important to me if I was going to make a leap. When you think about that much tenure at a company, it can be really scary in
Mhm.
terms of thinking about leaving, because there's a lot of people that at that point are thinking about, this is my life, this is my career life, right? I may have 10 or whatever more years to go, and why would I leave? And I think I was saying to myself, if I don't leave and go pursue something else, will I look back and I regret that? And that was what sort of drove me to put some things on paper, though, to say what's important to me if I make this journey. And thankfully, I had a friend named Dom Jones who reached out, and you hit at that right time, for me and my journey. One thing I'll say about that when we talk about like what led us to that is I remember sort of opening the door when you left me, right? So originally you
Mhm.
left, the role that when you were working for me. And I remember opening that door with you and sort of maybe even in a joking way saying, hey, don't forget about me,
Yep.
Um, and you didn't, thankfully, because about 3.5 years ago, you sort of knocked on my door and said, hey, we have this role. And that's what led me to explore opportunities at Varsity Brands. And so I've been at Varsity Brands now for about 3.5 years. Completely different career journey than at AT&T, where it's a Fortune 10 company. You have all these robust programs and things that are established, and coming into a growing, smaller private equity held company is something completely different. But it's been a lot of fun over these past 3.5 years. And so now I'm in Varsity Brands with a role over project management, operations, sort of in some ways a chief of staff-esque role, which I held in a couple times at AT&T, for the innovation and the IT departments. So that kind of
Yeah.
brings us to today.
I Amazing journey. There's so much that I want to pull from that. But I chuckled a bit because I will never forget the conversation when I was serving as your chief of staff, and when I told you that I was going to be leaving AT&T. We sat down for a normal one-on-one. You had your laptop open, ready to just dig into all of the millions of things that we had to do. And I said, Jen, I think you need to close your laptop. We need to talk.
That is a conversation that
Yes.
I will never forget either. Never forget that.
Oh man. But I remember I told you, that I was going to be transitioning. After you collected yourself, I recall you being so supportive. And I saw you also balancing the leader and the old crap. What are we about to do with the, it's fine, we'll make it through this, with the, oh shoot, I really care about him too. So is this a good move for you? Like I watched that full surface. Um, but you're right. You did open the door and you said, hey, if there's ever an opportunity, just I'm open to conversation. And it was amazing to see how things came full circle. But I think the lesson in that is to never burn bridges, because you never know how throughout your career things will land back at your doorstep.
I think that's so important because if you think about it, we haven't, there are many times in your career when you think about roles and hierarchy and levels and things,
Mhm.
you know, it's not about not burning the bridges and keeping the relationships just with people that are,
Mhm.
maybe above you in an organizational hierarchy or at some higher level than you. It goes all the way across. I mean, there are relationships and doors that can be opened from anyone that you've built relationships with and worked with. It doesn't matter if that person has, you've worked for them or they've worked for you or you've worked with them. I can think of multiple examples where we've connected different people along the way, and agnostic of what that relationship was. And I think that's something for people to really keep in mind.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's amazing advice. That leads me into one of my first big questions. You talked about how many roles you've held over the course of even just 23 years at AT&T.
Well, yeah, 23 at AT&T.
23.
Yeah.
Um, that takes a certain degree of confidence to be willing to constantly shift. And in some cases, it's been into roles or functions or departments where you had no prior experience and knowledge. But I'm willing to bet you had confidence to a degree in your leadership and your ability to learn.
Uh, yeah, that is absolutely the case. I mean, I can think of quite a few jobs that I landed myself into, and as I was sitting down with the team, I'll use an example of one of my most favorite jobs was the very first leader of call centers, and I had at the time never worked in a call center, never been in a call center,
Mhm.
never, never had union labor, on, workforce working on my team.
Hmm.
Never ran an organization that large and responsible for handling, I think, 13 million customers at the time. Um, and I really had to sit down and before I went and met with my team, acknowledge the strengths that I could bring to them as a leader, and also admit and acknowledge and be humble on everything that I needed to learn from them. They
Hmm.
were the experts, the individuals that were handling those calls from the customers, all the way up to the directors on the team, who had, most of them had grown up in that business. That is
Yeah.
that is what they did. Um, but I could go in and I could relate to the people. And I spent my time listening and really trying to understand what they did, what their pain points were, what was causing them not to give the best experience to our customers.
Hmm.
Those were important things. The fact that when I went in and I met all of those people and I talked to them and I made my way around the floor, that meant something to them. And that those relationships that you build, for then when I left their center, for them to send me notes on the side when they had a question, because I was there and I was present and I was interested in what was happening. I was interested in them as people. I was interested in how they were able to serve our customers. And that relationship and that information I would get back even after I left was so invaluable. And one of the things that I found was, there were big things on their minds that were things that maybe brought their engagement or their ENPS,
Hmm.
to a lower level than we would have liked. But what we found out with the amazing leaders that I had on my team is that small wins mattered to them.
Hmm.
They didn't need, maybe, for us to tackle the biggest thing that was on their list,
Hmm.
but if we paid really close attention to number 2 through 10 on their list, and they saw us making changes and they saw us caring,
Hmm.
then we saw their their engagement and how they would serve our customers and how they came and showed up to work dramatically change. And so watching that journey and building those relationships, that was definitely one of those jobs where I went in not knowing anything,
Hmm.
and I had to be ready to admit what I didn't know. And I had to be willing and ready to sit down and spend a lot of time listening and learning before I maybe formulating opinions, in the background, but not pushing any of those on the center or my team
Hmm.
until I had really built that trust in those relationships with them. And that takes patience,
Hmm.
but it can serve itself very, very well. And that was just such a fun job.
It takes patience. It also takes a ton of humility as well. To that point, I'm actually curious, because you have had so much experience stepping into a new leadership role with huge responsibility. Can you speak a little bit about the pacing with which you would lean in and learn and observe versus starting to drive, and what that would typically look like for you?
Yeah, when I would go into a new role, I mean, I would make my massive list of people that I believed I needed to go meet with and talk to. And that would be, in some cases I was coming into a role that somebody had sat in the seat before. In some cases I was coming into a role that might be different or new or whatever. And so the first, I would say, 30 days was just about going and meeting with people and sitting down. Like, I needed to try to start some type of rapport. And every conversation I go into then would lead me to, somebody would say, oh, you also need to talk to this person, or maybe you should join this call, or maybe you should listen to this or read this. So that first 30 days of, you know, just kind of sitting in the background, I would say, almost, and asking questions along the way, and just so I could learn, and then taking, another 30 days to try to spit some things back to the team, not in terms of changing anything, but I'm a big believer in asking why, and asking a lot of questions why, so that I can
You do.
totally, understand. I know you're laughing at me. Yes.
5 whys.
You've lived that. Yes, yes, exactly. Ask the 5 ways. And one of the things you find along that journey sometimes is you ask the teams why, and when they can't tell you why, or you can't really drill down, and we get to that, one of my pet peeves is, they're just like, I don't know, we've just always done it like that.
Yes.
Okay. Then
Yep.
then we do a big stop, then we say, okay, it very well may be the right way to do it, and we might be doing it in the best way possible,
Mm.
but we should probably dig in a little bit harder, because if that's really our reason and that's what the answer is, then it probably deserves a little extra attention, and just for us to validate that. And
Mm.
sometimes that proves to be a situation where somebody says, yeah, this isn't the best way. Like, what
Yeah.
do we do? We just, you have a process, you have your documents, you have your flow, whatever it is. And we run a machine sometimes, and you don't stop and pause to think about it. And that's, to me, been one of the values of stepping into these uncomfortable situations where I maybe don't know,
Mm.
is it does force some of those whys, and it forces us to rethink in some cases how we might, be serving our customers, or how our operation, might be running along.
Yeah. What stands out so much about what you're saying, it's a certain brand of leadership to lead that way versus I don't really have technically I don't have to take the time because I'm in a position of power, and once I come up with the idea of what needs to happen, technically you can go. But you've always had this approach where it's leadership through influence and it's gaining buy-in and commitment. So, story time, if you will. When I was serving under your leadership as chief of staff, I remember getting annoyed at something at first. It's because I had to learn it. But here's what I remember: you would be so busy all the time just doing stuff. And I came to you and said, Jen, I'm going to audit your calendar. Is it okay if I do that? I'm going to work with your assistant and I'm going to audit your calendar and put all of your activity in buckets. Do you remember that at all?
Yes, but it's fuzzy, but I do
Okay.
remember that.
So
Yes.
here's what I did. I wanted to see how much time you were spending with your internal team versus the critical projects we had versus heads down. Jen could get her work done versus stakeholder or partners and other
Hmm.
clients and upward leadership meetings. So up the chain. And what stood out to me, I will never forget, there was an excessive amount of time that you invested with partners and clients and like leadership up the chain. And I remember at first trying to get you to like reinvest more time in other areas. But when I shared that with you, you gave me this look like, so what's your point? Like, but here's I started to realize how important it was to invest so much time, especially with partners. And what I learned and saw over time is that anytime we needed favors or buy-in or support or air cover, we always had it as a team. And I think it's because of the time that you invested in those other areas. So I'm curious if you could talk to leaders about why it's important to invest in relationships, which turn into the ability to lead not just your team, but to lead across and to lead up. What's your thinking around that?
Yeah, if I go back to one of the things that I would talk about a lot when we were at AT&T, many times they would want to know my opinion on, what were things that were a pillar of my leadership philosophy. And relationships was the number one thing on
Mm.
there. And it was being proactive with building those relationships and building that trust, not just, to your point, in terms of the team, but across the business. Because you're right, like, there are so many times where we need people in those other work groups. And I'm a big believer in part of this, I'm very thankful that you always helped me. We were a really good match, because you would help me stop and pause, take a breath, because I am, I like to get stuff done, and I like to, and
Mhm.
check the box, do all of those things. But part of what I do in that is also think through my week, think through my calendar, think through how I'm spending my time. And I try to balance various pillars of, to your point, am I meeting with external stakeholders? Am I keeping connected with, key leaders that I can learn from, or that I can learn about the business from? Am I spending time with employees that may be, in other work groups or on my team, but that are, a level below me, so I can help them and help bring them along? And so that balance of those various types of relationships, and not letting, oh, by the way, also peers, like,
Yeah.
peers, whether it be peers on my team, like if my calendar gets lopsided, if I'm only focused on my team, then I'm not going to hear what's going on around me. Like, I am a big person that connects the dots across the business and doesn't just think about my one area. And I love that. Like, I feel like I'm better for it because I can stitch things together that we're doing that may connect to another work group,
Mhm.
and vice versa. Or in many cases, I'm stitching two other people together. And hey, I chatted with, this person over here last week, and something that they said, I think you might need to go, so
Yeah.
I'm back building these bridges, not just that are benefiting me, but that are benefiting the overall business, because I believe those people should be
Mm.
chatting about something or solving problems together. And that's just important. That's how my brain works, and that's important to me. And it's lent to, various successes, and it just fills me up, to be able to meet with those different individuals.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Here's the dynamic I really want to get your perspective on. Ironically, I've had maybe a good 4 conversations in the last 3 weeks or so, where individuals have been shifting roles, taking on new responsibilities in the team, or starting a new job, new company. And in each instance, they've had this dynamic of being hired into a role where the job description is fuzzy, it's unclear, and essentially the task is, I'm hiring you, I need you to go figure out what you need to be doing and like what success looks like. And I realized that there are not a lot of people that thrive in that type of situation. You seem to be one who has, because of how you're wired and just your experience and reps that you've had doing it. So I'd love for you to speak about some of the experiences that you've had where you stepped into a role as a leader and you're responsible for coming up with what you're supposed to be doing and measuring the success of that. What does that look
Yeah,
like for you?
it can be uncomfortable. You're right, and it can be scary. I have found myself in that position, quite a few times. One of them being coming to Varsity Brands.
Mhm.
I was hired into Varsity Brands as, vice president of innovation operations. There had never been a vice president of innovation operations.
Yeah.
There was a belief that there were some functions, and it fit within that job description, but no one was really telling me what to go do.
Mhm.
Exactly to your point. And that goes back to that meeting with my boss, meeting with every, peer, direct report to him that was on the team, meeting with some people, down in the team, meeting with our key partners and saying, like, what's not working? Like, where do we have opportunities? And there were many things that are obviously working, but sometimes when you need an organization to go from this level to that level, that's when, this becomes important. And in our case, the organization was sort of shifting out of one division to the center. And so
Mhm.
then the question was, okay, what now needs to occur? That's been very important because, it may not be my boss exactly telling me everything that I'm going to do in a 40-hour work week. Of course, my boss is giving me things that are important to him, and I know I need to go meet those deliverables. But the rest of it was up to me to figure out. And so,
Mhm.
that could be daunting in a way that there can be a laundry list of things.
Hmm.
And then you say, well, wait a minute, I don't have enough time in the day to do those. So that's when you have to start getting down to, well, is it really my job to do that? Or do I need to influence and coach some of the other leaders on the team?
Hmm.
And let's help shape and change maybe how they're working. Some of it may be, yes, it's probably me, but how do I prioritize these things to get the biggest impact? And so you're constantly in this little bit of, trying to formulate a plan and then test it out and then try to formulate a plan and then test it out. And, there has to be open dialogue with your boss to say, okay, I think this is what the things I'm going to work on. Am I,
Yeah.
are those right? Do those feel right? Does that feel like the direction that I'm going to go? Okay, yes, head nod. Okay, now move down that path. So you have to be willing, um, rather than assume someone is going to tell you what it is,
Mhm.
you have to dive in and formulate your own opinions and strategy and then go get that validated. And maybe it's a yes and then you get some direction and then you go run with it. And that's how I would say that I've approached that in the times,
Yeah.
that I've been in that situation, and it's definitely been more than once.
You are ticking. This feels like a master class. Like you're ticking the boxes in so many important areas. Influence, the importance, as you just spoke. I put that in the category of being able to form your own strategic vision for a role that you're stepping into, building relationships up, down, and laterally, being curious, being able to take risks.
You asked something else, Dom, that I don't think I touched on, and I can think of a different job in which this was key. I
Hmm.
I was standing up a team, leading a customer experience team, and it was a small, nimble team. I mean, I had 3 people that I was able to hire, and I had to strategically determine what those roles were and fill those seats. And no one had had this role either. And that was one where measures of success and the KPIs mattered.
Yes.
And one of the things I determined in that job was, because it was going to be something that was looked at as an opportunity to influence and impact the business in a big way in terms of customer churn or calls to the call center or credits, given to customers because maybe, there was a misunderstanding on their bill or something. And
Mhm.
what we realized in that job was we needed some quick wins. So, like formulating a plan that was going to get us to some data driven decisions
Mhm.
in a short amount of time was going to be key, because otherwise, we were always going to be asked,
Mhm.
where are you? What are you going to do? When are you going to deliver something? And so that, I would say, that's the other piece of advice I give to people on, if you're in that situation where there's ambiguity in there, it's a little bit unclear and you're defining it, being as proactive as you can be to socialize what you're working on, why you're working on it, when you believe you're going to come to, a decision point or have information ready or something. That proactive nature gives people the confidence
Mhm.
that you're figuring it out, and they're not then worried about, well, how are you doing this, or what are you going to do, or when are you going to have this. And so that becomes important, I think, especially in those roles.
Yeah, and it's what instills other people's and leaders' confidence in you because you have
Yes,
something tangible, that you could and measurable that you can show. Thank you for adding
exactly.
that. All right, so we're creeping up on a time where folks have got to get back to work if they're listening to this in break or lunch or something. Um, I would love to give the last word for you for someone with as much experience as you have taking risks, learning, and leading. Can you speak to emerging leaders, those stepping up to the plate to take responsibility and to drive with their team? What would you have to say to that leader?
One of the things that I keep thinking about, because you talked about this, about, going on this journey, a quote that I have and that I used to talk about when we were, talking about making change. And it's for emerging leaders, it's easy to be comfortable and to think that, okay, I went to school for this, I'm trained as this, I'm going to be a product marketing expert and this is what I'm going to do. But following your passion is so important. And it may not be a one step in order to get where you need to, where you ultimately want to go. Like what I
Mhm.
found myself doing in many cases, it's like this, it's not a ladder, it's a lattice. I
Yeah.
mean, this journey that I've been on, I might be looking over here down the line and I would say, oh, okay, I think I'm going to have to do this first and then this and then this. There's this quote that just keeps like playing in my mind all the time of like, how do you do that? And it's the quote is be bold and courageous. When you look back on your life, you'll regret the things you didn't do more than the things you did.
Mm,
And thinking about that every time you're at one of those decision points is
mhm,
because it's going to be scary and it's going to be uncomfortable. And you might think, well, why would I, leave this to go do this? But when you have that itch and you have that thing that's, out there that you think could fuel you, it
mhm,
just go for it, and there's multiple ways in which to get there, but more often than not, where I've seen people struggle in their careers, it's because they're feeling stuck or they're just not doing something that is really, fueling their passion every day, or they're not utilizing their biggest strengths and skill sets. And so it's like,
mhm,
okay, well, good. We all have a choice. We all have a choice to make. And it does take a little bit of work,
mhm.
but on the other side of that, I think, the what you feel and the happiness that you'll have for it. And gosh, you're a prime example of this, taking these leaps. I mean, you've taken so many leaps,
Yeah.
and each one of those you can look back and you can say, wow, like these are all the things I gained. These are the relationships I gained. These are the
Yeah.
skills I've gained. There's just so many things. And you won't, we don't always get every one of them right.
No.
Sometimes you're going to make a misstep and that's okay. Like even when I've had a maybe not ideal boss, or maybe the job, I just didn't love it.
Mhm,
What I did step back and say is, but what did I learn from it? In some cases,
mhm.
it might have been like, ooh, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to lead like that. But there was something that I took away from it that helped me get to my next journey.
Yeah. Beautifully stated. Jen, thank you for being awesome. Thank you for your commitment to leading and just doing life how you do it. Thank you for your friendship. We've got to come back and do this again at some point.
We do this. Any conversation with you is amazing. You have helped me so much in my career. You had the ability to get me to pause. You've taught me how to think strategically, and so I'm very grateful and always happy to come on and chat with you.
Oh, I love it. All right. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.